All right, so for this week's methods presentation, I will be discussing the critical incident technique. Overall, general information, critical incident techniques. This is a task analysis method. It's work-oriented, so it focuses on the behavior of the employee, and it allows analysts to understand what workers do in their job, what behaviors occur, and results that yield. So, according to Flanagan, this critical incident technique consists of a set of procedures for collecting direct observation of behavior in a way that it facilitates their potential usefulness in solving practical problems within an organization. And the using critical incident techniques requires subject matter experts to recall specific instances of work behaviors, and these specific instances are called critical incidents. The purposes and application of a critical incident technique, they help to construct forms for performance appraisals. So if an analyst is able to collect enough data, the information that is collected can then be used to assess employees and the behaviors that they're displaying and how these things are impacting the organization and their successes in their role. It helps to identify traits for selection. So again, if these behaviors are identified, so what works and what doesn't work, then during selection, it can be told to the applicants, what's expected of them, and then they also know going into the selection process what kind of things they're looking for when hiring. They also help when training needs are being assessed. So what areas need improvement? What can we work on? What kind of behaviors have we seen, and how can we adjust to be sure that the behaviors yield positive results and that they're effective? Steps and procedures for critical incident technique. You're going to start with finding a statement of context. So what led up to this behavior, the problem or opportunity? Doesn't need to be negative. So what's going on when the behavior occurs? And then obviously identifying the behavior itself, and then the consequences of behavior. So what resulted? It is important to keep in mind too that incidents that are being described should be relatively recent. Memory distorts our results, so the longer you're waiting or the further back in someone's memory that they're pulling these incidents, they could be inaccurate, which can definitely impact our final results and decisions. And also, it is important to collect our positive critical incidents before our negatives. I think setting the stage, starting off on a positive note, kind of allows the subject matter expert to understand what the purpose of the interview is, what you're looking for, and that you're not going to just be focused on a negative, and causes less worry for them. And then these are just some tips for creating critical incidents, and these come from the text. So when you are running the initial interview with your subject matter expert, it's advised to avoid the term critical incidents just because it does seem to have such a negative connotation to it. So they suggest using the term behavioral examples. So it's a more general term. Start with good examples, as I talked about before, and focus on positive, and don't put a whole lot of emphasis on negative. And it should be pretty equal, but you don't want to seem like you're just focusing on these poor behaviors that are taking place within an organization. You're going to have your SME imagine specific people and tell stories about them, but the stories should be job related. So the behaviors that they're describing in the incident should be related to the job itself. And then to use tasks as prompts if needed. So if the SME is struggling coming up with any incidents or examples for you, provide a task and see if they're able to provide any behaviors they notice when these tasks are being performed. And then when you go to write the behavioral example, It's important to get the key circumstances or context of the behavior. Again, what was going on when the behavior took place. To get the behavior itself. So be specific in this step. Focus on one behavior per incident. And then focus on the behavior and not the qualities of the person. So if the SME tells you that so-and-so was creative and that's all they're able to give you, then in turn ask, how were they creative? What did they do to make them seem creative? And then obviously you need to get the outcome. So the outcome should be a direct result of the behavior. So it will tell you if the behavior was effective or ineffective. This is just an example. Also, this comes from the book, and I think the table they had a few more examples, but so the table displays a written statement and then a version that is a little bit more detailed, that gives you more information. So, for example, the department chair forgot things and made the students' lives more difficult. So they forgot things and it made things more difficult, but how? So the better option would be to say that the department chair forgot to assign an instructor for the class, and at the first class there was no one there to be sure that they were enrolled in the correct class or that they weren't missing something. So it's pretty self-explanatory. Some concerns with critical incident technique methods. So it's important to consider the source of information and the validity of the recalled information provided by the source. So a source of information can be an incumbent or a supervisor or even a client. And then when recalling information, it should be relevant to the job and a pretty current observation. Advantages of using the critical incident technique: it provides detail about work behaviors, doesn't require any purchasing, so it's pretty easy to conduct itself. It gives insight into the actual behaviors and consequences that occur in the job, and it helps to construct performance appraisals, identifies traits for selection, some of the things I mentioned earlier. So these are first-hand observations that you're obtaining from subject matter experts, so it kind of gives you an insight from the perspective of them and from other workers. And it gives you specific incidents, so it's not just a general task. It's a specific task that they've observed and the behaviors that they observed during that task. So it's pretty detailed and can give you quite a bit of information about the job itself. Some disadvantages: different sources of information will provide different critical incidents. So, for example, a supervisor is going to give you different information than an incumbent. So they focus on different aspects of the job. So supervisor is going to be more focused on the overall role of this person and some of the tasks that they perform day to day, but an incumbent is going to be able to give you smaller, more detailed incidents that have occurred. Maybe not something that happens all of the time. And again, it will become important when going through all of the data and what data you choose to provide in the end for your results. Whether, this is something that occurs every day. Is this important to the job? Or is it just an incident that the incumbent happened to experience once or twice and it's not really vital to performing the job? Again, the use of critical incident can be intimidating because it does sound like it could be negative. So trying to frame the term in a more positive light will definitely help. And then the time that it takes to do these. So interviewing is great. You do get these firsthand experiences, but time is important because you could be working on strict timelines. So since it is such a personalized method, it's a slow process, and it can limit how much data that is being obtained, especially if it's just you. If you're not working with somebody else, another consultant of sorts, it can be difficult to obtain a good amount of information to use later on. And And I think that is all I have. So again, a lot of this information came from our text, but this seems to be a very common and favorable method. So there's a lot of information out there, but I just kind of went over the general basic information. And there are my references. Thank you.